Book 2, Part 16. When I woke up, I smacked my lips and gave a soft moan. I was laying on something very comfortable, and it smelled good, too. I wiggled my body a little, my eyes still closed. I felt arms wrap around me. Shh, nice and slow, Track whispered, and then kissed the top of my head. I smiled and snuggled up next to him, only then realizing I was no longer in wolf form. It didn't matter. I had missed laying there with him so much and decided I was going to push everything else out of my mind and enjoy it, at least for a few minutes. So I did just that. I was laying on my side with my head on his chest. It pulled my memory back to the manor and laying in my own bed, curled up with my best friend. I smiled again, nuzzling him. He chuckled, making my head bounce, and stroked my hair. He didn't say anything for a long time, and I was glad. I was pretending that we were back in my room, imagining that he had crawled through my window and we had fallen asleep together, just like we had for so many years. Michaud was standing guard just outside my door, his odd double mimicking him at his side. Several minutes later, Track sighed. As much as I would love to lay here and hold you all night. My eyes opened up and I lifted my chin. Shh, please, I whispered. Just a few minutes more. Light brown eyes smiled down at me and I smiled back. Then his hand pushed my head softly back onto his chest. I laid my arm over him and inhaled slowly. His scent was comforting and my nose tingled a bit. I had missed him more than even I knew. He was my best friend, but it went deeper than that too. I wondered if werewolves had an ancient phrase for what he and I had too. I winced as that thought opened the gates for all the other ones. My smile dipped a little. Finally I sighed. Track, I know you wouldn't go through all of this and say all of this, I frowned. I just don't understand how or why. Yeah, that was me, great with words. He gave me a soft squeeze then. I can't imagine how this all seems to you, but it's true. Then I moved a bit and raised up. I rested my chin on his chest and looked up at him. There was only the one dim light on, but I drank in his features, smiling. He was so handsome in his own right, and I still didn't quite understand why he hadn't taken a mate. I know that look, he chuckled. We are not going to lay here and discuss my love life. You mean lack of, I smiled, and his eyes twinkled. He had missed this too. Just then a door opened. Track looked up, and because I was facing away, I twisted to look over my shoulder. I cried out, quickly moving my hand to my side. He grabbed me, turned me, and laid me flat on my back in a split second. Ryan walked over. Did it tear more? Track moved my hand and moaned. Yeah. My hand was wet with blood. It's not that bad, I whispered. Then I remembered. I had shifted. The main reason I had stayed in wolf form for so long was because I weren't sure how much damage the torture of shifting would do. I went to put my hand back to my side, but Track grabbed it. We'll get you fixed up. Ryan walked towards the table and Track winked. Have to have you nice and healthy for the next time you do something stupid. He grunted then as my fist found his own side. Ryan shook his head, but he was smiling as well. Does me good to see you two at it again. Makes things almost feel normal. I could hit him harder, I offered, and Track moved back a bit. It wasn't out of fear, just part of the game. Part of me wanted to jump up, knock him off the bed, and pin him, but I didn't think Ryan would be too happy about that. Look at that mess, Track sighed. You got blood all over your clothes and the bed now. I huffed and he shook his head. You're changing them yourself. I went to swing, but Ryan caught my arm. I need you to lay still. I nodded and laid my arm back down. He sat on the side of the bed and pulled the edge of my shirt up. Where did my clothes come from? I thought, realizing I was wearing my own. We brought 'em with, Trax stated. I don't really think you could wear our stuff. He smiled at me and I rolled my eyes, but was grinning too. Ryan had me roll onto my side and he took the bandages off. It's still pretty tender and bleeding. The shift did that. Tore it up pretty good. You lost a lot of healing. My brows rose and I tried to turn and look. Trax shook his head. Trust me, you don't want to see, he shivered. It's horrible. Ryan gave a soft growl and Track winked at me. I shook my head and turned to Ryan. How bad is it? Well, it's not as bad as when it first happened, but not as good as before you shifted. He turned and pulled some things out of a bag. We're gonna have to get more supplies. He rummaged through the duffel bag. We only have enough in here for one more change. Trax sat up and snatched a cell phone off the nightstand that was probably bolted to the floor in the wall. This place was decent, but not fancy by any means. I winced as my alpha cut the bandages away and looked up. Please don't tell me you're going to pour that acid stuff on me. Acid? He asked, frowning. I nodded. That horrible cold stuff that burned so bad that I'm numb for a while after. He pulled out a large bottle and wiggled it. You mean this? I bit my lower lip and he put it back in the bag. That's only needed if we're worried about infection. We cleaned it pretty good after you shifted. Right now, I'm just going to clean you up, put that salve on, and re-bandage you. Okay, that I could deal with. That other stuff was just plain evil, whatever it was. I laid my head on the pillow and looked up at Track, who was sitting on my other side, the phone to his ear. Yeah, she went and did herself up pretty good, he sighed playfully, grinning at me. I actually stuck my tongue out at him and his eyes sparkled. Who was that? I whispered. None of your, was all he got out. I took advantage of my vampire reflexes and snatched the phone away from him. I sensed Ryan tense, but when no one stopped me, I put it to my ear. What else does she need? I heard and smiled. I could go for a few good horror DVDs. Something tells me this place doesn't have digital TV. Raina? Came Jackson's shocked voice. I giggled. No, this is Track. I've always felt a bit feminine, and I decided to... Hey! I yelped, when Track lowered his face and tried to snatch the phone. Jackson's laughter made my heart pound. Man, I missed him too. Ignore the crazy girl on the phone, Track stated, his lips near my ear. She's still pretty mental and doesn't know what she's saying. I reached up, put a hand on his chest, and shoved him hard. He toppled over and off the bed, hitting the floor with a thud. Raina, you okay? Came Jackson's panicked voice. Then I heard others in the background. Yeah, I'm fine, I chuckled. But Track is on the floor now, where a good doggy belongs. I yelped and then laughed when Track leapt onto the bed in one motion. Ryan sighed. Track, go sit at the table. I need to finish here. Track slowly stood, leaning over the bed and winking at me. When you're healed, beware. I rolled my eyes. So when do I get to see you? I asked, putting the phone back up to my ear. That's up to Ryan, but I'm dying to see you too, came the excited reply. I turned my head and looked up, knowing he could hear the conversation. Jackson and Rock can come up once they bring back the supplies, he finished after hearing Jackson yell loudly through the phone. Always a catch, he chuckled, and I couldn't stop smiling. He relayed the information to whoever was with him and then said, "Ask Ryan what else he needs." I turned and looked again. Ryan finished taping the large gauze in place and then wiped his hands clean. Finally, he took the phone and stood up. Track almost looked like he was pouting as he sat at the table. Ryan gave him a sharp nod that was dipped in a warning, and he was at the bed in a blink. I was on my back now. It was much more comfortable. He sat down next to me and then looked at the bed. Ryan had put towels down, but we both could smell the blood. "Let's move you over to the other bed," he said, reaching down and slipping one hand under my back. He pushed and sat me up so I didn't have to use my side muscles to do it. My head spun for a minute, but then I swung my legs over the edge. It did feel good to be back on two legs. "Hang on," he said as he rushed around to my side and then took my hands and helped me up. I grinned. "I'm not that unbreakable." "I would have to disagree," he smiled, glancing at my side, and then kept one of my hands as I walked the whole 4 steps to the other bed. When I turned, he watched me sit, and I rolled my eyes. It was so nice to be able to do that. "Going to have room service come up and take care of that?" I said, looking at the other bed. It had 6 white hotel towels, and they were all pretty covered in blood. He bent down, smiled, and then pushed his hand under my knees and behind my back, lifting me in one quick motion. I gasped. Then he sat me down on the bed sideways with my legs out. "You just sit here and try to look innocent while I take care of that." I shoved him playfully and he laughed, then turned and started to strip the bed. Luckily, they had been careful and the mattress wasn't tainted. That would be hard to explain. He took the ball of soiled bedding and walked into the other room. Ryan walked over, put the cell phone on the nightstand, and glanced at me. "So, there isn't much here to do in here, I'm afraid." "We could talk," I said in a small, almost meek voice as Track walked back out with an armload of clean linens. My alpha sat down on the edge of my bed. "What would you like to talk about?" Wasn't it obvious? Ryan tilted his neck until it cracked. Another thing he'd do when he was stressed. I frowned and reached one hand out, laying it on his arm. Part of being a pack is hating it when the others are upset. When it's your alpha, it's 10 times worse. He looked down at my hand and then placed his on top of mine. "I was worried we wouldn't see you again," he confessed, and my nose tingled with the pain I heard in his voice. "I want to work this all out," I said, feeling Track's eyes on me as he made the other bed. "I want things back the way they were." There was a plea in my tone, and Ryan shook his head. "Things can never go back the way they were, Raina." The tears welled up in my eyes. "I don't understand why not." This time I did whisper. The words were painful. He turned to me then, his eyes so full of many emotions. "Raina, what happened at the manor? Your father taking you away, hiding you, us coming to look for you, and now—" He looked around the room. "And add that to the main situation, and there's just no going back." I knew he didn't mean I couldn't physically go back. He meant things and people would never be the same even if I did. That hit too hard, and a few tears slowly rolled down my cheeks. "We do need to talk about this and find a solution," he stated, and I nodded quietly. I wanted him to say, "Here is what we'll do," and have the perfect solution to all of this. He was my alpha, the pack's alpha. I knew that that didn't mean he had all the answers, but in this case, I wanted him to. A few quiet minutes passed. The only sound was Track quickly finishing up the bed. After he was done, he walked around and sat on the other side of me, so he was next to me. Ryan looked at him, and they had another silent conversation. I wiped at my tears, and Track moved closer so that our arms touched. It felt so good to have him close, and I reached out and took his hand, lacing my fingers through his. "Tell me about this odd feeling you have," Ryan finally said. I looked up slowly, using my free hand to wipe the rest of the wetness off my face. "Well," I started, bunching up my brows in thought, "it's like an odd pull. There was something in my mind that was hiding, just where I couldn't get to it." I shook my head. That sounded so stupid. It wasn't like the "did I leave the lights on" kind of thing, but I huffed. "It's very hard to explain." "I need you to try." I nodded, and he gave me a small smile. We all need to know how this bonding has affected you. We know a good deal about how it is affecting Phil. When he said my Click Alpha's name, my stomach tightened. Not in a disgusted sort of way, but I felt so bad for him. He must be absolutely miserable, and even though I didn't really believe that he was in love with me, I knew something had happened to him. Track gave my hand a small squeeze to get my focus. I gave a nod. "Well, there were times when, for some strange reason, I kept looking in a certain direction." Wow, that sounded worse than the other comment. When they both waited, I told them about the times it had happened. Ryan asked how it made me feel and what I did about it and after it. Next, I told him about the other feelings I sometimes had, like someone was watching me, or that they were just around the next corner or behind the next door. It was extremely frustrating, I stated, but nothing like you said he's going through. Did that make me a horrible person, I wondered? If whatever happened really did happen to both of us, why was mine so minor? I bit my lower lip, and Track stood up, pulling his hand free. I looked at him, worried he felt the same way, that I was insensitive. He chuckled. "You need a clean shirt." And I looked down at mine. "Oh," I replied softly. "Raina, what about the dreams?" Ryan asked, and drew my attention back to him. I blew out my breath and told him about those too, even the ones about my vampires and my werewolves being divided. While I was telling him, Track brought me a clean shirt and sat back down. I lifted my shirt, only slightly embarrassed, and quickly pulled the other one on. He took that other one into the room, keeping the door open so he could hear. "Something inside you remembers that night," Ryan stated after I was done. I shrugged, but he and Track nodded. "You were completely wild that night," he stated, and I flinched. It was embarrassing and hard to hear about me being that way. No one had ever sat me down and told me the whole story, and I was glad for that. "Could I call Jonathan?" I asked, and they both stiffened. I put my hand back on Ryan's arm, just to let him know I'm safe. If I called my dad, he would, go postal. But if I called Jonathan, let him know I'm okay, I looked at them both, and let him know I want to be here right now. That should calm down a lot of people and maybe start the process for something good. Yeah, I wasn't great with words, was I? Ryan's brows tightened. He glanced over at the phones on the table. The room was quiet for a few minutes, and then he slowly nodded. "What?" Track snapped. "You can't be..." Ryan gave a low growl, and Track clamped his mouth shut. I turned to my best friend. They probably have dozens of people out looking for me, I explained, as Ryan leaned over and picked up one of the phones. This way they'll know I'm okay, and I'll tell them to tell my dad I want to stay here and work this out. Track was frowning, but he kept quiet. Ryan handed me the phone. This one is not traceable, he explained. When I balked, he shrugged, smiling. No matter what you say, they won't stop looking for you. That wasn't true. If I told them to stop, they would. I didn't say the words out loud, because even I didn't believe them. I pushed some buttons and put the phone to my ear. Ryan and Track stayed where they were. There was a click, and then Jonathan's voice. Hey, it's me, Raina, I shrugged, not knowing how else to start the conversation. Raina, where are you? He almost yelled, then turned and did yell that I was on the phone. Jonathan, I'm okay, I said, putting one hand up as if he were in front of me. Where are you? He spat, his voice dripping with a deep anger I knew wasn't meant for me. My brows rose and my eyes lifted to Ryan, who shrugged with an I told you so look. Jonathan, look, I'm with the pack, trying to... They kidnapped you, Raina. They drugged us all and took you. What have they done to you? Drugged them? I frowned, and Ryan gave me another look. This one said, I'll explain when you're done. Jonathan, please. They haven't done anything to me. I'm fine. He yelled something else, and I sighed loudly. This wasn't going so well. Will you please listen to me? If they so much as hurt a hair on your head... The anger in his voice shocked me. I had thought he would be excited and relieved, but he was spitting mad. Jonathan, I told you I'm fine, I snapped back. You shifted. Yes? That was kind of obvious, wasn't it? Why did they let you shift? You weren't supposed to shift for 2 more days, at least. He actually covered the phone with his hand, but I heard the string of threats anyhow. Was this really my Jonathan? I couldn't stop it. I fainted and shifted while I was out. Okay, not a good thing to say. I cringed, and Track moaned softly. Raina, just tell me where you are. We will come and get you. We'll bring the doctor. You need your doctor. I can't imagine what shifting did to your injury. He was talking so fast and his voice was shaky. Okay, this was starting to irritate me. He was not listening to what I was trying to tell him. Jonathan, will you just listen? I yelled. He stopped for a minute, but I heard several voices in the background. How bad is it? He asked. Is what? Your wound. My eyes got wider. Did he just yell at me? There was a sigh on the other end of the phone. I'm sorry, love. We were all so worried. Track gave a low growl. I had to guess it was due to the pet name. I knew they could both hear the conversation, but I was okay with that. They were pack, and I didn't want any more secrets. Do you know where you are? How did you get to a phone? Did you escape? His voice was up an octave now, and I heard a lot of noise behind him. Jonathan Hilvar, will you please stop and listen to me? I snapped harder. Track chuckled and Ryan smiled, shaking his head. What? I could be forceful when I needed to. I even lifted my chin a little to look the part. Raina, we're getting into the car. Just tell me what you see around there. Are there any street signs? What in the world? Jonathan, stop right there. If you don't calm down and listen to me, I glanced at Track, who winked at me. I will hang up this phone right now. Wow, that was major for me. The phone went quiet for a split second. "All right, talk to me," came a shocked voice. "Good. Finally." "I'm with the pack. Well, part of it. I'm completely fine. The shifting was not because of anyone else but me. No one made me faint. I just got, well, you know me." "They stressed you out by taking you," he hissed, but his voice was lower now. "No, they didn't." Men, really, did they ever listen? "They are taking very good care of me, and they have cleaned the wound, and it only ripped a little." Okay, so that was bending the truth some, but I didn't like the way he was talking. "That's good, but love, I need you to tell me where you are." He was talking slower now, not calm by any means, but it was something. I sighed hard. "Jonathan, you aren't going to come and get me." "Of course I am. We're in the car. We just need some directions or landmarks." "No. I mean, I don't want you to." I whispered the last part. Ugh. That was harder to say than I thought. More silence. "Jonathan, I want this all worked out. My dad couldn't do it, so I have to." Still nothing on the other end. I swallowed hard. "I'm going to stay here for a bit and fix this. I'm the one that messed it up, and I'm the one that will fix it." Was he still on the phone? I listened and could make out voices in the background. "You didn't mess anything up, love," came Jonathan's very low voice. I could hear so many emotions in those few words, and my nose tingled a bit. He was hurt, angry, worried, and afraid. "Yes, I did. Please, please understand. This is my pack. They would never hurt me. They are just trying to do what no one else would do." "And exactly what is that?" he hissed, the anger up a notch again. "Tell me their side of the story, the situation," I corrected quickly, glancing up at Ryan. His eyes fed me courage and confidence, and I sat up straighter. I needed to hear it from them, and no one would let me. Then guilt kicked in. I know my dad was trying to protect me because he loves me. He was just, well, he couldn't think of any other way, so he packed me up and hid me. I chewed my lip. Was I even making any sense? "Raina, they drugged all of us, even Aunt Mary. They snuck in and stole you." He kept his voice low, but the anger was building again. "Even Aunt Mary?" Ryan winked, and then Track shrugged. "Okay, maybe that was a bit much, but that really wasn't the point." "Please tell my dad I'm perfectly fine, and regardless of how I got here, I'm staying of my own free will, and I'm going to straighten this all out." Another long pause. I really hated those. "Raina, I don't like this. I want to be there with you. I'll stay with you and them. Tell me where you are and I will come. Just me." When I looked at Ryan, he shook his head. "Jonathan, please trust me on this. I'm a big girl and I know what I'm doing." "Raina, please." His voice was so sad now, and my nose tingled more. I missed him already. Part of me wanted to tell him that, but it didn't seem like a good idea. I had to show him I was strong and capable of doing this. "Take care of Wolfie for me. I'll call you soon." Then I clicked the phone off. My chest squeezed tight. I could imagine him sitting in the back of the car looking at the phone, calling my name. I was a monster. My head dropped and I tossed the phone on the thin comforter. Ryan leaned over and lifted my chin. That was a very brave thing you did, pup." The phone rang immediately, and Track grabbed it and hit a button. Chapter 21. The tears started to fall then, the pain and the anger in Jonathan's voice finally affecting me. Track moved closer, and I turned, wrapping my arms around him, and buried my face in his shoulder, ignoring the pain in my side. I felt his arms go around me, and he shifted his body so I wasn't twisted as much. Then I cried harder. Ryan put his hand on my back, and I felt that pack connection, that special thing that only werewolves share. It felt so good to have them both there. I wanted to curl up between them and sleep, waking up to my life the way it was before all of this happened. Track kissed the top of my head, flooding my mind with memories of laughing and playing without any cares. Unfortunately, reality was too strong and shoved the happiness out hard. I cried more. Ryan rubbed my back with his hand, and Track rocked me gently in his arms. I don't know how long we stayed that way, but it wasn't long enough. One of the phones beeped, and I sat up, the other two turning to look at it. Ryan picked it up, looked at the screen, and hit a button. "Hey, we're outside and have all the supplies. Can we come in?" It was Jackson. I smiled and wiped my face. Ryan gave a quick answer and tossed the phone back on the nightstand. He was watching me, his own eyes wet. I leaned forward and hugged him. "I am so sorry," I whispered. He hugged me carefully. "What exactly are you sorry for?" I sat up and shrugged. "For all of this." "None of this is your fault, Raina," he stated, and nodded to Track, who got up and headed towards the door. He opened the door just as Jackson lifted his hand to knock. Rock had 2 boxes in his arms filled with bags, and there were 2 more on the floor at Jackson's feet. He bent and scooped them up as they walked in. "So, how's the patient?" Rock asked, smiling as he put the boxes on the dresser. "Good," I stuttered, watching them. I had missed them so much. They both headed for the bed, and Track stepped in front of them. "Regardless of what she says, her side is still in bad shape, so keep that in mind." The 2 nodded and finished the walk to the bed. Ryan had moved over to the boxes and was going through them. I got soft hugs, which I knew was hard for them. They rarely did anything gently. "Stop staring," I finally chuckled, and Rock punched Jackson's arm. "Yeah, stop staring." Jackson ignored it and looked down at my side. "How bad is it?" I shrugged. "Just a scratch. I'm fine." He smiled, and then Track sat down next to me. "It's a lot more than a scratch, and it's going to take several days to heal." He shot me a hard look, and I stuck my tongue out. "Well then," Rock smiled, "seems those DVDs will come in handy, since I'm sure they will have you on bed rest." Then he looked at the bed. "We'll have to push them both together, though." "Why?" I asked. "How else are we all going to fit?" he replied seriously. Jackson shrugged, pushed Rock off the bed, and moved up next to me. "I don't know how you will, but I have my spot." Rock jumped up, grabbed Jackson's arm, and flung him off the bed. I laughed hard as he took the place next to me, kissed my cheek, and then snuggled up closer to my side. "Enough," came Ryan's calm voice as Jackson was about to lunge. "Raina is hurt, and you 2 will take that place somewhere else." He never raised his voice, and there was no anger in it at all, but Rock nodded and sat carefully down by my feet. Track shook his head, smiling, and I grinned. My guys were back, and I was very happy about that. They started to tell me about the movies they brought, but I shook my head. How was everyone else? Rock smiled. Miles and Missy got hitched, he stated in an excited voice. My eyes widened. Really? That's fantastic, I cried. Then my smile dipped. I had missed it. Jackson glared at the other. Yeah, they wanted to wait, but no one would let them. I nodded slowly, looking at the floor. I had missed their wedding. My heart tightened a bit. Way to go, Jay, Rock growled and put his arm around my shoulder. They made everyone take a bazillion pictures. Missy wanted to make sure that she could show them to you. We also videotaped it, so it'll be like you were there. That made me smile. Missy was always so thoughtful. Was it beautiful? He flinched. I don't use that word, but it was cool. I chuckled. I'm happy for them. Ryan walked up then, looked us over and smiled. So, bed rest until that closes, he stated, and I moaned. Does it have to be in the bed? He pursed his lips and thought. Well, in the room at least. He pointed at me. But if it bleeds again, you will be in that bed until it heals. Then he looked at the guys. And if one of you is to blame for it happening, he poked his thumb towards the door. Dang, boss, that's harsh, Rock whistled, then looked at me. Guess we have to be extra careful with you or we'll be out on the streets. I giggled. Rock and Jackson were the clowns of the pack, but it was such a nice change from having to be so serious. I leaned over and kissed Rock's cheek. Hey, Jackson pouted, and I crooked my finger at him. He grinned and went to jump up, but Ryan cleared his throat. Oh yeah, glass princess, got it, he smiled, and carefully got up, walked over, and sat on my other side. Glass princess, I chuckled. He winked. You like? Then he tilted his head and tapped his cheek. I rolled my eyes, leaned over, and kissed it. He wiggled his brows at Rock. She kissed me longer. What? Enough, you two. If I could find a way to harness your energy, we could run Polson for a year, they both recited, and Ryan chuckled. You boys go eat. He looked at me and I shook my head. I brought a few thermoses, just in case, Track put in, and I nodded as the three went for some of the bags that were now set up on the dresser. Aren't you going to eat? I asked Ryan, as Ryan sat on the side of the bed. I will. They know not to touch my food, he stated, and I smiled. How are you doing? It barely hurts at all, I stated, putting a hand on my side. That was even the truth. There was too much going on for me to even think about that. That's not what I meant, but I'm glad. Oh, well, I looked over at the guys. I had forgotten all about that for a minute, and I had. With Rock's and Jackson's silliness, and Track and Ryan in the room, I had actually very quickly forgotten the reality of all this, even the phone call with Jonathan. I hung up on him, I said, lowering my head. How many more things would I do that I swore I would never do to someone? You showed courage and stood up for yourself, he stated. I'm proud of you for that. Wow, I suddenly felt almost giddy. Praise from your alpha has that effect on you. I was grinning and he chuckled. Now then, as much as I hate to pull you off of the high those two create, he glanced over at the table where the three were stuffing their faces, then turned. They paused in mid-bite, and he shook his head, then moved his eyes back to me. At some point, I want to bring Phil here to meet you. Meet me? What did he mean by that? I had known Phil for years. I swallowed hard. What had happened to him? The giddiness vanished, and I suddenly wasn't so sure I wanted to meet him. I would rather remember him the way he was, Strong, cute, smart, and in charge of my clique. Yes, meet you, he stated, putting one hand on mine. Phil is, well, he's different now. I frowned, looking down at our hands. What exactly happened to him? He tilted his head one way and then the other. Plenty, he whispered, and I gasped. Ryan shook his head. Not much that the eye can see now, but he looks pretty much the same. Well, that was something. I had started to worry that he had turned into some mutated creature. Was this all my fault, too? I was wild that night, and still only had spotted memories from it. But how exactly did I do this? You didn't do it, Ray, Trax stated, wiping his mouth on a wad of napkins. Ryan shook his head. No, you didn't, at all, so don't you dare try to think otherwise. I wish having your alpha say that made it completely impossible to do. But unfortunately, it didn't work this way. How could it not be my fault? Bonding happens. It can't be forced onto anyone ever, he explained, making sure I was listening. You can't make someone bond with another. It simply isn't possible. Well, that wasn't exactly what I was worried about, but it was good to know. It was more likely that a dark cloud of chaos that seemed to follow me had done just that in the forest that night. Aote is even greater than normal bonding, so it is even more impossible to push on someone else. She thinks she's jinxed, Trax stated, and I gave a low growl. I needed to remember not to think with a part he could hear. He chuckled and took another bite of his massive burger. Jinxed? Ryan asked, and I shrugged, looking down at the comforter. Not jinxed, but, well, things just seem to go very wrong with me and around me. Ryan smiled. Yes, they do. When my eyes popped, he shrugged. But this is not a wrong thing, Raina. He lowered his head to smile at me. It's actually pretty amazing. Legend level amazing. I turned and looked at the main door. Where is he? You don't know? Jackson asked, and then grunted when Rock punched him in the arm. I frowned. How would I know that? Ryan growled towards the table, then turned back to me. Think about Phil for a minute. Push everything else out of your mind and concentrate on him. My brows crumpled. What will that do? Remember how you said that there were times you kept looking in a certain direction? Remember how you said that there were times you kept looking in a certain direction? I nodded, and then my eyes widened, remembering them telling me how Phil could track me now from anywhere. I swallowed hard and closed my eyes. It was easy to picture the face I had known for so long. As soon as it popped in my mind, I felt something strange. A tingle wasn't the right word, but I couldn't think of another word that fit. I lifted my chin and inhaled slowly. My heart beat a little faster, and then I gasped, my eyes shooting open. What happened? Rock asked, and I turned to see the three of them standing at the side of the bed now. Ryan put his hand up, and they went quiet. I turned to my alpha, my eyes still wide. I'm not sure. Tell me what you sensed, he stated in that calm voice. It was like there was suddenly another heart beating in my chest, I whispered, pulling my hand up to my neckline. Then I frowned. I don't know. It was like I felt excitement, but it wasn't mine. I looked up at Ryan, who was now smiling. Rock whistled, and I looked at them all. Was it him? I gasped in amazement and disbelief. Ryan nodded, and I felt the room spin a bit. Luckily, I didn't faint, and the room steadied quickly. My mind, however, continued to tilt. That's not possible, I whispered, my hand moving to my stomach. Not usual, but possible, Ryan corrected, and I looked up at him, the fear dancing in my eyes. Track sat down on the bed, unnerved by my body language. I didn't turn. I kept my eyes locked on Ryan's. He was my alpha, my strength, and my focus right now. No part of me knew how to react to this, or even how to sort it out in my mind, so I needed him to do that for me. His eyes met mine and pulled me into them, comforting me and relaxing me a little. It wasn't hypnotic. I still knew everything that was going on around me, but I needed this from him. He reached out and took my hand. "We will get through this," he stated, his voice so calm that I gave a small smile. I believed him. Then I nearly jumped out of my skin when one of the phones went off. Jackson rushed over and picked it up, looking at the screen. He held it out to Ryan, who also read the information, then hit a button and stood. "You boys be careful with her," he smiled, winking at me. Then he put the phone to his ear and walked into the other room, shutting the door behind him. Jackson walked over to one of the bags. "Okay, we have 5 DVDs to choose from." "Let me guess. They all have hot chicks in them," I grinned. Rock, who was now sitting on the other side of me, shrugged. "What's the point of watching them otherwise?" Track was still watching me, and I turned to him. "Please, not right now," I whispered, with a plea in my voice and my eyes. He nodded, slowly. Then we watched Jackson fight with the plastic and tape on the DVD. "Whoever invented this strip of tape stuff is warped," he hissed as he tried to peel the tape that held the movie closed. Rock went to stand up, but then leaned back against the headboard. "Oh, you just wanted me to stand up, didn't you?" Rock smiled and yanked open the movie in one movement. Rock leaned into my ear. He wanted this spot. Then he put his arm around me, but he ain't getting it. By the time Ryan came back into the room, I was relaxed in the pile of guys. Track was sitting up against the headboard, and I had my head in his lap. Rock was laying with his head on my good side, and Jackson was sitting next to Track, with his legs over mine. It may have looked sloppy, but it was so warm and comfortable, physically and emotionally. A wolf needed her pack, desperately. I had been without mine for too long. Not only were we physically in contact, but our scents were mixing, and even our body temperatures were matching. It was something I wished everyone could experience at least once in their life. The complete serenity was good for the soul, too. I turned my head, lifting it up a little. Ryan smiled at me and then stood there looking at the 4 of us. I smiled back, seeing the happiness sparkle in his eyes. He was feeling it too, even from where he stood. "You keep these guys out of trouble for a few minutes. I have to run down the street," he said, giving us all another look. "Going to see Phil?" I asked in an almost sleepy voice, and propping my chin on Track's leg. Ryan nodded, watching me for my reaction. "Will you tell him I'm sorry?" He frowned. "Raina, what did I tell you about that?" "I know, but please tell him anyhow." Then I turned and laid my head back on my best friend's lap. Ryan sighed but smiled. "You boys cause any trouble or damage her or—" Rock gave a mimicked salute. "There will be no reason to throttle us when you return, Cap'n." I giggled, and Rock turned his head and looked at me. You like that one, huh? Jackson shoved him with his foot. Quit wiggling around the glass princess before you get us all booted. Rock grabbed his foot, and Track gave a low growl. They stopped and turned, looking at Ryan, who shook his head. Maybe I should take one of you with me. The complaints were quickly thrown out, and then I grunted when Rock sat up quickly, pushing off my side. The room went quiet, and I rolled my eyes as they all looked at me. I'm fine. He just has a hard head, I smiled, even though it did send a sharp pain through my wound. Jackson smacked Rock's head, then nodded. Dang, you're right. It's hard as a... Jackson, Ryan warned. Yeah, sorry. Ryan sighed. I won't be long. You know the rules and stay put. Then he walked over, leaned down, and kissed the top of my head. If they get out of hand, you can send them to the other room. I smiled, and he stood, shot the guys one more hard look, and left. As soon as the door closed, Jackson clapped his hands. So, what are we going to do now? I turned my head and looked at him. He had that let's get into some trouble sparkle in his eyes. Track shook his head. Shut up and sit down, man. We're going to lay right here and watch the movie. Yes, mother, Jackson growled back, then flopped back into place. I wiggled a bit to get comfortable again and laid my hand on Track's leg next to my chin. When the credits finally started to roll, Jackson moved onto his side so he was facing me. I tilted my head down to see him better. Another movie? I wrinkled my nose at him. Got any with hot guys in it? He shrugged. Why would you need that? He sat all the way up, hopped off the bed, and threw his arms out. You have the three of us. Any girl would give her right paw to be curled up on this bed right now. He wiggled his brows, then walked over and grabbed the stack of movies. When he flopped back down on the side of the bed, I grunted from the impact, and Jackson leaned over and shoved him hard. Careful, man. Glass princess here is fragile. I rolled my eyes but had to laugh. Rock ignored him and flashed the cover of one of the movies, looking at me and waiting. I shrugged. I guess that one will work. There's that one guy, Turtle, Track corrected me, chuckling. I sat up and nodded. He's pretty hot. Jackson snatched the DVD case from Rock, who didn't even blink. This is how the two of them were. It wasn't personal. Hot? You think he's hot? He cringed, tapping a finger on one of the pictures on the back. I leaned over, looked, and nodded. Yeah, definitely hot. I even threw in a girly sigh for good measure. Track, go call Ryan. I think this girl has a fever or infection or something. She's hallucinating. I smiled, and Track leaned over and shoved him hard, knocking him off the bed. He landed with a loud thud, but he jumped right up and smiled. Sorry, man. Didn't realize you thought he was hot, too. I giggled again, and Track shook his head. Nice try. You're not getting my spot. Say what you want. Jackson frowned. You've had her in your lap the whole movie, man. Switch up. No, Track stated calmly, but put one hand around me and gently pushed me so I was lying in his lap again. I turned, this time on my back, and smiled as Jackson hopped up on the bed. Then he got on all fours, straddled over me, his face inches from mine. Now, if he were any other guy, this would be very awkward, but it was just Jackson. So, how about it, babe? My lap is much softer, he said, dropping his voice into a low, deep rumble that did send a bit of a chill through me. Only because you're flabby, Track laughed. Jackson ignored him and smiled down at me, softening his eyes. How did guys do that? Then his brows wiggled and he leaned forward, until we were almost nose to nose. He turned his head just a little, watching my eyes. I held back my smile. They were so predictable. 3 male wolves in the room with me. The musk was getting thick. Suddenly, a wave of bravery swept over at me. Or at least, I think that's what it was. "So, you going to just hang there, or you going to kiss me?" I said, also softening my voice. Jackson grinned. "Is that what you want?" Now, I will admit there was a small part of me that was worried about this. Jackson was used to pushing things too far. Before I could worry about it too long, his eyes widened, and then he was flung backwards, disappearing over the side of the bed. Another loud thud, and this time some grunting. Track was shaking his head and looking towards the floor. "Man, you know you can't play like that right now." My brow knit. What did that mean? My sight had nothing to do with what happened. We were just playing, but that wasn't the point. "Go put the movie in and knock it off before you get us all kicked out," Track stated quickly. I looked up at him, and he shook his head. "Can't take these two anywhere." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, adjusted his shirt, and then walked over and put the movie in. We resumed our positions and snuggled up in our heap of bodies. A few minutes into the movie, Track's head turned towards the door. I didn't notice until the other two stiffened, and I grunted from the pressure as their bodies shifted. We heard the door click, and then Ryan walked in, this time with Marcus. I smiled and waved from my heap, and he did the same. Ryan walked over and casually tossed a shirt on the nightstand. Marcus moved to the table and unloaded several bags of takeout food. That got the guy's attention, and I grunted again as Rock and Jackson untangled themselves and headed towards the meal. I sat up, and Track kissed my forehead, then followed them. I felt a chill from the lack of body heat and shivered. Ryan frowned. "Are you cold?" "Not really," I smiled. "They just all got up at the same time." He grinned. "Hungry yet?" I shook my head, and he sat down on the side of the bed. Just then I caught a scent of something. I looked at him and then frowned. It wasn't coming from him. I tilted my head and then lifted it slightly, feeling him watching me. I inhaled a few times and glanced around. "What is that?" "What do you smell?" he asked quietly. I saw him put his hands up to stop the others, but my mind was focused. The scent, whatever it was amazing. I had to find it. I sat up more and leaned towards the side of the bed, then looked at the shirt he had tossed there. When I reached out and took it, my hand shook. I was excited and freaked at the same time. When I lifted the shirt to my face, I think I actually moaned. The scent that was coming from it was almost intoxicating. I smiled and inhaled again. My skin tingled, my heartbeat increased, and I wanted to somehow crawl inside and never come out. The smell wasn't like anything I had known before. I closed my eyes and gently rubbed it on my cheek. It may sound corny, but it was like floating on a cloud, or what I would imagine that would be like. My side didn't hurt, my heart didn't hurt, and my whole body felt plugged in. Then I did hear a sound and turned, blinking. Ryan smiled at me, and I quickly moved the shirt away from my face. I had forgotten there was anyone else here. "I brought that for you," he stated carefully, watching my face. His eyes were moist, but he drank me in, as if he were in awe of me. Why would he be in awe of me? I looked down at the rather plain blue t-shirt and smiled. He might as well have just handed me a piece of that cloud. I stroked it with my other hand. "Thank you," I whispered, and suddenly wanted to lay down and snuggle up with it. He reached over and put a hand on my arm. "Raina?" I blinked and looked up at him, pulling the shirt to me. His moist eyes smiled when he did. "That's Phil's shirt." The sensations crashed around me, and I felt like I had been shoved hard. I grunted and flung the shirt on the bed as if it had caught on fire. I heard a small gasp from across the room and lifted my head. They were all watching me, their eyes wide. The panic swelled in me, and I started to blink hard. "What's on that shirt?" I whispered, my voice shaky, my heart racing. "What did you put on it?" I looked up at Ryan, my own eyes wide now. Is that what you used to drug the others?" He shook his head slowly, still smiling. "There's nothing on that shirt but Phil's scent." I swear I saw a tear run down his cheek, but I freaked out and jumped off the bed, landing on the other side. "No, there's something else on there," I gasped, staring at it like it would attack me at any minute. Ryan stood, both hands out in front of him. "Raina, be calm," he said in that low alpha voice. This time, the effects didn't work so well. "There's something else on that shirt. There's nothing else on that shirt. Phil was wearing it. I had him take it off so I could bring it here and see what..." He realized how that sounded, and my own eyes welled up. Was I some kind of cheap entertainment now? Let's bring her a shirt and watch her flip out, sitting on the bed, cooing and sniffing it? My anger replaced the hurt, and I glared at him. "Get that thing out of here," I hissed in a low voice. When his brows lifted, my head dropped a little. "Please, just take it away," I whimpered, now looking at the comforter on the bed. "I'll take it," Trax stated quietly, but Ryan turned. "Go sit down," he hissed at my best friend, who complied grudgingly. My alpha turned back to me. "Raina, remember when I told you that I needed to know what effects this had on you?" I blinked and then nodded when his brows rose. "This is what we need to know. Here." He looked around. "Before I brought him here, I needed to know what may happen." I don't understand," I said in a voice that was so low only his wolf ears could hear it. He walked carefully around the bed. "I know you don't. That's why we're here. We're going to help you through this, remember?" When I didn't respond, he stepped up closer and took one of my hands. "We're pack, Raina. We don't do things to purposely hurt each other." I gave a dull nod again, and he lifted my chin. "We all love you. You know that." Another nod from me, still slow, and he sighed. "We have never experienced this before. We are all learning, even me." When I looked back to the bed at the shirt, the emotions swirled around me. Part of me wanted to snatch it up before anyone else could take it. That thought scared me. I needed that shirt, that scent, and a part of me craved it. That also terrified me. Why? Why would a shirt with my Click Alpha scent on it make me feel this way? A shiver ran through me again. Who was going crazy? Was it me, or was it them? I looked up at Ryan and couldn't fathom it being him. He was so smart, so focused, always in control. That left one option. It was me. The shifting was finally making me go mad. I had lucked out and survived the actual physical process, but now I was going mad. In a way that was almost comforting. All of this wasn't really happening. I was just losing my mind. Hybrids that shifted never stayed whole. The few that survived the actual shifts always went mad. Everyone knew that. I nodded at the thought and then looked up as Track took a few steps towards the other side of the bed. He was watching me, his brown eyes telling me he wanted to come and comfort me. I gave him a small, soft smile. It's okay. I get it now, I said, my voice relaxed. Ryan frowned and turned. Track's eyes stayed locked on mine. She thinks she's going mad from the hybrid shifting. She doesn't believe any of this is real. There was a frustration in his voice, but it was also filled with sadness. Ryan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. My head dropped. I had upset my alpha again. Then my eyes widened and I looked at the shirt on the bed. If I were going mad, then there wasn't any harm in me picking that shirt up. I wanted to feel it, to smell it. I reached out and scooped it up, my body shaking with excitement. I didn't put it to my nose, though. I could smell it from here. All the eyes in the room were on me now, but I didn't care. I had it safely in my hands. They couldn't take it from me. One of the phones went off, and I yelped and pulled it to my chest protectively, my heartbeat kicking up a notch. Ryan put his hand out towards me, then turned. Marcus walked around the bed carefully. I had my head lowered, but my eyes watched him, just in case he tried to grab it. He picked up one of the phones and looked at the screen. It's Otis, he said, and Ryan nodded, taking it when Marcus held it out. He pushed the button and held it to his ear, keeping his eyes locked on me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the shirt still up against me. I inhaled slowly and smiled. Whatever they put on this was amazing. If I was going mad, I might as well let them drug me so I wouldn't suffer through it. Didn't they do that with terminally ill people to ease their last days? Hybrids that went mad only got worse. My fate was sealed now. There was no cure for it. My pack took me so they could make the process easier, more bearable. I smiled, loving them for that. I felt arms slip around me from behind and blinked, turning to see Track on the bed with me now. I smiled at him and laid my head back on his shoulder. Thank you, I whispered. Ray, you aren't going mad, he whispered into my cheek. I reached up and patted his. It's okay, Track. I'm a big girl. I get it now, and I appreciate it. I'm going to stop there.